Hola, so good afternoon. So we have one more session for a guided meditation, in the same method. And I said there were no stages. You don't alter the method as you develop along the path, nor have I seen really clearly distinct different methods of this practice. It's pretty simple, and I've explained it now. We practice it. Having said that, there is some kind of variation. And so kind of a spectrum in the following way. In the first reference we had to this, citing the Vajra essence, then Padmasambhava, speaking by way of Dujam Lingpa, comments, and I think if I can find it really quickly, I'll just read it verbatim. It might be good. Let's see. Oh yeah, there it is. Okay, he's referring to this practice, of course, and he really unpacks it. And that is, he says, such people should relax and let thoughts be as they are, continually observing them with unwavering mindfulness and careful introspection. So you know this term sign, you remember? That is mindfulness of breathing is shamatha with a sign, a vector, a referent. You're attending to something outside of your own awareness. Well, the thoughts, just relax, let thoughts be. In other words, you know the drill. You don't modify them, terminate them, perpetuate them. Let them be. Thoughts are not the same as the awareness of the thoughts. And you already know this, right? You're resting in awareness, you're observing thoughts coming up. Thoughts include, of course, not just discursive thoughts, but images and other events as well. So if we take that very literally, which I think we should, then reading it that way, this practice we've done, how to rest the mind in its natural state, is indeed a practice of shamatha with a sign, because you're attending to something other than your awareness itself. So again, there's a vector. You're looking at the thoughts, images, and so forth, straightforward. And then this is corroborated later in the text when he gives, in the Vajra essence, when he gives an analogy. I think it's there, but I know it's, in the Mud and Feathers it's there, and that is the cowherd. It's in the Vajra essence too, isn't it? Yeah. And so in the same text he said, now what's the quality, in what manner, now using an analogy, which they use so well, and this is a nomadic analogy, because that's what the teachings were revealed to Dujam Lingpa. It's like a cowherder observing his cows, his yaks and cows, who are grazing out on an open plain. So he's watching his cows, looking after them. I think if we push that analogy, we say the cowherder doesn't own the cows, he's just a hired hand, somebody else owns them, so he's watching other people's cows graze on the field. So in other words, there's a vector. He's looking at the cows to make sure they're okay, there's no wolf coming in, or eagles that might take a stray calf, and so forth. So both of those, and then there's a third one, a third case, and that is in the Mahamudra tradition, the great Penshen Rinpoche, who's tutor of the fifth Dalai Lama, Penshen Losang Chökyi Gyaltsen, wrote a brilliant root text and commentary on Mahamudra. He teaches shamatha, and one of the two methods of shamatha he teaches is this practice. And then he gives an analogy. He said, and I'll keep this parable very short, like in ancient days, 2,000 years ago, the Indian seafarers, they would head out onto the high seas, and if they were exploring unexplored areas, they would run out of supplies pretty soon, and they would need to know where is the nearest land. What the navigators would do, they would bring caged ravens with them. When they were way out to sea and wanting, hey, we need to find land within 5 days or whatever, they would release a raven that has been caged all along. The raven would fly up, and if the raven saw land, then the raven would make a beeline for the land, and the navigator would be watching the flight of the raven as he goes higher and higher, being able to see further and further in all directions. But the navigator would clearly be really closely tracking the movements of the spiraling movements higher and higher of the raven. In the classic parable, in this case, the raven couldn't find any land, and so then, not being suicidal, not wanting to just plunge into the ocean, then the raven circles back down and lands once again upon the boat. So he said, in a similar fashion, you observe thoughts arising, and the thought sometimes is a narrative. There's a story, and it spins around and around, and you're just witnessing it. You're not thinking it, you're just witnessing. But then sooner or later, that thought not having anywhere else to land, that thought arose from the space of your mind. It also dissolves back into the space of the mind. But you track it. You watch it with interest for as long as it plays itself out. It could be a discursive thought. It could be a video, whatever it may be. It could be resentment, possibly, or generosity or whatever. But you watch it during the full course, and then when it's finished, it dissolves right back into the space of the mind from which it arose. So all of that suggests then that in this practice you're really paying attention to thoughts. There. Then, about 3 years ago, it's 2016, yeah, about 3 years ago, very close to 3 years ago, then when I was receiving teachings and interpreting for and asking questions of young Rinpoche, teaching exactly this method, I asked him, is this method shamatha with a sign or is it shamatha without a sign? Without a sign, once again, means no vector. You're just resting in awareness of awareness, so your little antenna is pulled back in, and you're just flowing in that cognizance of being cognizant. But he said in his text and in his commentary, you are noting thoughts of the past, and when they occur, you don't follow them back to the past. Thoughts pertaining to the future will arise. You don't go off into the future, anticipating the future. And when thoughts circle around pertaining to the present, you don't cogitate, you don't think about the present. And so that sounded like, oh, then you're observing thoughts. But I asked him, is this shamatha with a sign, without a sign? And he said, shamatha without a sign. Kind of a surprise. And another student of Lama Karma asked the same question, and he gave the same answer. It's really, this is shamatha without a sign. So, but then, okay, what's clearly implied here is that there's a gradient. Within the context of this practice, some may be more inclined to take a real interest in the thoughts, letting them be, gradually watching them fade out, dissolve, and go into absence of mindfulness, but really watching them with interest. And others may be much more on the spectrum of overwhelmingly, like 80% or so. You remember the Dzogchen approach to mindfulness of breathing? 80% just resting in awareness of awareness, and peripherally noting just the rhythm of the breath. Analogous to that. What Yang Rinpoche taught from his own experience, certainly, and Lama Karma clearly had achieved shamatha. He said so. It's very rare. They're saying shamatha without a sign. So on that end of the spectrum, you're still noting thoughts, but overwhelmingly, you're just resting in that ongoing flow of awareness, clear, luminous cognizance of luminosity and cognizance. But, and I'll end on this point, we'll go right to the practice, but you're noting the thoughts just enough so that you're not carried away by them. A thought pertaining to the past, a memory, arises. You simply note it, the thought as a thought, the mentally perceived as a mental perceived, and just that, but you don't take any more interest. You're noting it from that stillness, and you're noting it just enough so that you're not carried away. It's like being inside a house with a lot of glass windows, and you have a very cowardly thief, a sneak thief that would like to come in and steal your stuff. But if you're really watching carefully, when the thief comes around and you see him in the window, and you see the thief, the sheer fact that the thief knows that he's been seen will make him go away. Something like that, you know? So they disappear upon observation. So this is then a spectrum. And I think then it's up to you where you want to place yourself in that spectrum from session to session. Some you might be much more interested in the mind and really focusing. It's just on the events, the arising, watching them closely with unwavering mindfulness and with introspection. But other occasions, you might just be much more interested in just resting right there in the nature of awareness, knowing that this is like a tube. When you're resting right now in your simplest, most direct, unmediated experience of being aware, resting there, it's like sitting on top of a tube or on top of an elevator shaft. And if you just go down from there, straight down, it's going to take you right to the bhavanga without elaboration. So you've got choices there, right? You can be really emphasizing much more strongly just awareness of awareness and note thoughts just enough so you're not carried away by them. And that's not much, while you're overwhelmingly resting here. Or you may take a real interest in the thoughts, but nevertheless, viewing them from that stillness of awareness. So you see the gradient? And you can be anywhere along that gradient that you like, and it's still this practice. Is that all clear? Okay. You just received teachings from two great masters in it, living, one is just recently living, and then Lama Karma is still living, so I'm really of no account myself. I don't speak with any authority at all. But I really have sat at the feet of great masters, in Nyanja Rinpoche, Lama Karma, great masters, and then referring back to Padmasambhava, Dujum Lingpa, Lerap Lingpa, and so forth, then I'm bowing to the teachings I just gave you. Because they're really rooted in such deep experience. So let's have one final session on this method, And we'll call it, and it will be shamatha with a sign or without a sign, or somewhere in between, according to your own predilection. Settle your body, speech, and mind as you've done before. we can begin the main practice, letting your eyes open, at least partially open, your gaze vacant, resting in the space in front of you. And first of all, re-emphasize what you've already done. That utter sense of release, of letting go of all grasping, desires, hopes, and fears, all thoughts, just releasing your awareness to rest right where it already is, without doing anything with it. And in that stillness, that deep sense of ease, letting your awareness reflexively know itself, be aware of being aware, without adorning that awareness with any appearances or thoughts. And from the simplicity of that stillness, self-illuminating, self-cognizing, then let's begin by giving a good deal of attention, a lot of interest to the thoughts and other mental activities arising in the space of the mind. From this stillness, observe the motions with interest. Observing the thoughts and so on arising from the space of the mind, playing themselves out, and dissolving back into the space from which they arose. Again, whenever, time and again, when you see that you have been carried away, you've moved, first of all, relax. Then release not the thought. You're not banishing the thought or whatever else carried you away. You're not getting rid of it. What you are releasing is your identification with it. And the thought can continue, but with no host, nothing to latch onto. So first of all, relax, which already entails relaxing your grasping onto that thought. Fully release the grasping. And now that you're a free agent, return to the present moment, return to your throne, and observe what's happening right now, what is arising right now in the space of your mind. And simply observe its nature. Be persistent and patient. Don't slip into frustration or exasperation. This takes practice. And now let's move to the other end of the spectrum, where something like 80% of our attention, roughly speaking, is really resting right there, vividly, moment by moment, aware of being aware. That this is where you will achieve shamatha. You will achieve shamatha in the awareness of awareness, which we'll turn to tomorrow. But you are explicitly and deliberately maintaining this peripheral awareness of the thoughts and so on arising in the mind. And when they pertain to the past, you just note them and don't follow them to the past. They pertain to the future, you don't follow them into the imaginary future, nor do you think the thoughts that are circling around the present moment. You note them just enough not to be carried away by them, while resting primarily in the awareness of awareness. Horaso. So in explaining mindfulness of breathing, then I commented that when you come to the end of the path, then your mind dissolves into this bhavanga, which is universally affirmed among accomplished yogis in the Theravada tradition. But then this practice here, I've not found anywhere in the Theravada tradition or the Pali Canon, as I mentioned before, and it's in the most explicitly in the Mahamudra and Dzogchen traditions. And this is entirely Sanskrit-based. In India, it was entirely Sanskrit-based, and it was all translated into Tibetan. So I'm guessing here, but I would imagine the great Mahasiddhas, the great adepts of Mahamudra and Dzogchen in India, may very well have not had a whole lot of communication with the Theravadins, because that's about as far away from Theravada as you can get, in a way. And so, and then especially when Dzogchen and Mahamudra went over the Himalayas to Tibet, then we can be sure that hardly any Tibetans went down to Sri Lanka or Thailand or Burma. They probably die of diseases and so forth, going from an Arctic, basic quasi-Arctic climate down to the tropics. And Theravada monks didn't go to Tibet. Why would they want to go there? So I'm saying this because it's rather like, in a scientific context, two independent labs that might know each other exist but really not communicate much, and two independent labs making the same discovery. And so they wouldn't be using the same terminology, but they may be describing exactly the same experience and very similar methods for getting there, and then describing in somewhat different ways. So this is what happened here in the Dzogchen tradition, and where they arrive when they come to the culmination of this path, resting the mind in its natural state, they call, in the Dzogchen tradition, you've come to rest in the alaya vijnana, Sanskrit, alaya vijnana, or kunshi namshi in Tibetan, often translated as foundation consciousness, storehouse consciousness, total ground consciousness. But I choose, especially after I read this and studied this in the Vajra essence, I decided to translate this term as substrate consciousness. But this is not unique to the Dzogchen tradition. This substrate consciousness, the existence of the alaya vijnana, is very, very dominant, the central theme of the Chittamatra or mind-only school of Indian Buddhism. But it's reified, it's taken to be existing by its own inherent nature, which is completely incompatible with Madhyamaka. Nevertheless, we see the great expounder of Madhyamaka, the great systematizer of Madhyamaka, Nagarjuna. Then he writes in his commentary on Bodhicitta, or Bodhicitta Vivarana, for which I had oral transmission and commentary from His Holiness Dalai Lama, he writes, and this is a very careful translation, when iron approaches a magnet, like iron filings, for example, or a little piece of iron, it quickly spins into place. It kind of comes right towards the magnet. Although it has no mind, it appears as though it did. So it looks like the little piece of iron wants to get close to the magnet. So there's the analogy. Again, analogies abound in Buddhism. In the same way, the substrate consciousness, alaya vijnana, has no true existence. It does not exist by its own inherent nature. It has no intrinsic identity. It's not really there from its own side. In the same way, the substrate consciousness has no true existence, yet when it comes from a previous life and goes to the next, it moves just as though it were real. So just as the iron filing acts as if it were conscious and wanting to snuggle up against the magnet, so does consciousness move from here to there, from one life to the next, as if it was really there, moving from here to there, just as though it were real, and so it takes hold of another lifetime in existence. So Nagarjuna is clearly not refuting the alaya vijnana, but he is refuting the Chittamatra view of it. Chittamatrans might only say it's inherently existent, it's absolutely real, and Nagarjuna says you do not look close enough. Nothing is inherently real. Nothing in the objective universe exists by its own inherent self-nature, absolutely out there. But similarly, there's a symmetry here. Nothing in here, not mind, not consciousness, not the observing subject, nothing exists here from its own side, by its own inherent nature. And so then we can reaffirm there is an external world in a manner of speaking, and there is an internal world, even the alaya vijnana, in a manner of speaking. But that's only conventional or nominal existence, and is not inherently real. So this is Nagarjuna's view. He said it. And His Holiness commented on this point. Now, for those of you, and I think a number of you, have studied Tsongkhapa, Gelugpa tradition, Tsongkhapa flat out refutes the existence of the substrate consciousness, or alaya vijnana, because I think he simply made a decision, it's so strongly associated with Chittamatra. It's like they own it. Really, they came up with the idea. And so they own it, and if they own it, then I just have to throw this baby out with the bathwater. Because if they're insisting the alaya vijnana exists by its own inherent nature, well, we don't accept that, so we don't accept it at all. But then what does he do? But although the alaya vijnana doesn't exist at all, he says, nevertheless, there is a subtle continuum of mental consciousness that carries over from lifetime to lifetime, exactly as Nagarjuna just said. So what Nagarjuna is calling the alaya vijnana, or substrate consciousness, Tsongkhapa is calling subtle continuum of mental consciousness, and there's not any difference between the two at all. They're both saying does not exist by its own inherent nature. Chittamatra say, yes, it does. Well, okay, then we disagree. So, now I can say with total confidence that having studied quite carefully this Vajra essence and all the major works on Dzogchen revealed by Dujum Lingpa, which repeatedly refers to this substrate consciousness, he unequivocally states, beyond a shadow of a doubt, it does not inherently exist. And so then his teachings, his affirmation of the substrate consciousness, and we'll see the substrate, is completely in accordance with Tsongkhapa, completely in accordance with Nagarjuna, and completely refutes the assertion of the Chittamatra mind-only school that affirms the substrate consciousness but says it's inherently existent. So I've studied this for now almost 30 years, Dzogchen, especially the Dujum Lingpa. I've studied multiple lineages, overwhelmingly due to the kindness of Gyatso Rinpoche, but also His Holiness. And it's perfectly clear to me that the view of reality, view of mind in Dzogchen is completely compatible with Prasangika Madhyamika. This is technical talk, but the teachings on emptiness by Nagarjuna, Chantakirti, Shantadeva, Tsongkhapa, and so forth. And His Holiness feels the same way. That is, I feel like him. He's not following me. He doesn't, oh, Alan has a good idea. I think, oh, no, that never happened. And so several years back, I asked His Holiness, would you like me to translate some of the Dzogchen teachings of the 5th Dalai Lama? Would you like me to translate some of those into English? Because by then I'd been translating Dzogchen for like 20, 25 years or so. And I've studied Gelugpa pretty extensively. And he actually didn't answer that question. He said, well, how about translating these 7 essays written by 2 disciples of Lerab Lingpa? You remember him? We just finished his teachings. 2 prominent, very knowledgeable yogi disciples of Lerab Lingpa. They wrote 7 essays, each one showing the compatibility of Tsongkhapa with Dzogchen, Tsongkhapa with Mahamudra. He said, do you like to translate these? I said, whatever you say. And it turned out to be enormously difficult. And I got a lot of help from various Tibetans. Yangchen also helped me out with that. And so it was published. That's also published in Open Mind. But all of this is to say, His Holiness is a great champ. I think he's the greatest Gelugpa alive, and I don't think that's just my guru devotion. In terms of his knowledge, his experience, the depth of insight, his ability to speak, he really is easily the foremost Gelugpa scholar practitioner. And he emphatically states, having received extensive Dzogchen teachings himself, these are completely compatible. And he said, Alan, translate these 7 essays that shows everybody else they are compatible. So that's important. But now let's go, and if you like, let's look. I'm going to take you on a guided tour, carefully selected excerpts from this classic text, the Vajra Essence, and see what exactly is meant by substrate consciousness in Dzogchen, because this is representative of the entire Dzogchen tradition. This is a classic, very characteristic of Dzogchen as a whole. So here in this visionary teaching, Padmasambhava states, by applying yourself to this practice continually at all times. Which practice? The one we just did. That one. He makes it very clear. I wrote a whole book on this called Stilling the Mind, which is my oral commentary on this section of the text. So it's there for you to see. By applying yourself to this practice continuously at all times, both during and between meditation sessions. He's just referring now to a professional. They're not doing for this 3 hours or 10 hours. They're just doing it all day. And that's exactly what Lama Karma said he did. I think I mentioned that. That when he was doing the Shamatha retreat, he wasn't doing 4 sessions or 8 hours or 10 hours, practicing all day, and achieved it in 6 months. So by so doing, eventually all coarse and subtle thoughts will be calmed in the empty expanse of the essential nature of your mind. They'll be calmed in the substrate, that sheer vacuity that I referred to when I spoke of absence of mindfulness. They'll all be calm, they'll all subside. Like the little snow in the snow globe, they all go down. And then you just have a transparent, empty space. You'll become still. Your awareness will become still in an unfluctuating state. And becoming stable in this, you'll experience bliss like the warmth of a fire, luminosity like the dawn, and non-conceptuality like an ocean unmoved by waves. Yearning for this and believing in it, you'll not be able to bear being separated from it, and you'll hold fast to it. He's just described what it feels like to have achieved shamatha in this method, where you come to rest in that sheer vacuity. You invert your awareness right in upon itself, self-illuminating mindfulness, and the awareness you are self-illuminating is the substrate consciousness. I will guarantee that that's what he means. And now here's one of those universal descriptions. You find it throughout Indo-Tibetan Buddhism. When you come to rest in the substrate consciousness in this way, you will experience simultaneously three salient features of the substrate consciousness when you access it by having achieved shamatha. If you access it by just falling asleep or fainting, general anesthesia, you're not going to experience anything else. You're going to be just basically unconscious. Or when you die, most people just go blotto. They just fall into this dark near-attainment when they die. So when they're dead, they don't know it, because they've just fallen into the substrate, and the very nature of the substrate is unawareness. The nature of the substrate is unawareness. That's why when most people come to the culmination of the dying process, they slip into unawareness. They're dead and they don't even know it. Like when you fall deep asleep, you don't even know you're deep asleep. That's accessing the substrate or the bhavanga non-lucidly, right? But here, you've inverted your awareness. You're not just hanging out there in that limbo, that transitional phase between 1.0 and 2.0. You invert your awareness, and then three qualities. It's everywhere. De samitopa, bliss, luminosity, non-conceptuality, all three simultaneously. And you're so satisfied with this mix, this soup, that is simultaneously blissful and luminous, that is radiantly clear, intense, and it's non-conceptual. It's very easy to be satisfied. Very easy to say, this must be nirvana. If it's not, I don't care. This must be Rigpa. If it's not, I don't care. Maybe it's Buddhahood. If it's not, I don't care, because this is so good. Who would want anything more than this? So it's very easy. You'll find you'll just like it so much that unless you've developed really strong renunciation, and better yet, bodhicitta, you're just going to hang. You're going to stay there, because you've tapped into a relative artesian well of bliss, luminosity, and non-conceptuality, which means whenever you go there, you always get the three qualities. However long you stay, you get the three qualities. It never wears out, never gets stale. This is eudaimonia on a relative level. It's psychological eudaimonia. But you've not even begun to practice Vipassana or Mahamudra or Dzogchen, let alone stage of completion generation. So he shouts this from the rooftops. Get here. It's indispensable to get here. Keep on practicing until you settle your mind in its natural state. This is the mind in its natural state. Keep on practicing. Don't give up. Don't jump off to other practice and leave this one behind. But don't be complacent. Don't be satisfied. Because you have not even, if this is all you do, you've not even moved one hair's breadth towards the actual path, let alone proceeding on the path. So I'm speaking quite passionately. That's because they do. Monkey see, monkey do. I'm the monkey. He continues then, O Vajra of mind, this is Padmasambhava addressing these archetypal bodhisattvas in this pure vision. They're asking questions. I mean, it's amazing. One bodhisattva after another stands up and asks questions of Padmasambhava, and Drupchen Limi is having this whole vision, writing it down, and he's the scribe. It's quite extraordinary. So Padmasambhava addresses one of these archetypal bodhisattvas in his entourage, whose name is Vajra of mind. You can see it's utterly archetypal. O Vajra of mind, the rope of mindfulness and firmly maintained attention is dissolved by the power of meditative experience. Again, I think that should be plural, meditative experiences, because you have a whole bunch of them. These are the nyam. And over time, that mindfulness and attention of your coarse mind is going to dissolve. You know where it's going to dissolve, into that absence of mindfulness, until finally the ordinary mind of an ordinary being disappears, as it were. Isn't that clear? Your coarse mind, gone. You'll get it back, don't worry. That is, if you're not dead, you'll get it back. But if you achieve shamatha while you're in good health, this is not going to decrease your lifespan. You come right back and get your human mind again. You just put it down, come back and fetch it when you come out of meditation. Consequently, because the ordinary mind of an ordinary being disappears, you know where it disappears, right into the substrate consciousness. Consequently, compulsive thinking subsides, roving thoughts vanish into the space of awareness. That, of course, is the substrate. You then slip into the vacuity of the substrate. The substrate is that space. The substrate consciousness is the consciousness of that space. That's why I like to break it up that way. The substrate is the objective. The substrate consciousness is the subjective. The substrate consciousness, when you're resting in shamatha, is aware of the substrate, and it's aware of the substrate with the qualities of bliss, luminosity, and non-conceptuality. That's it in a nutshell. So, the empty space, you then slip into the vacuity of the substrate in which self, others, and objects disappear. By clinging to the experiences of vacuity and luminosity, clinging to it, you really like it, you hold on, I like this, you would cling to it, you love it, you become attached to it. By clinging to the experiences of vacuity and luminosity while looking inward, the appearances of self, others, and objects vanish. And this is the substrate consciousness. So it's very clear. You are completely oblivious of your physical environment. All of your 5 physical senses have shut down. You have no experience of being embodied. You're entirely in a mental space. Your mind has collapsed. Your subjective awareness, your subjective mind has collapsed, dissolved into the substrate consciousness. And you remember all those appearances, the objective appearances, thoughts, images, they've all dissolved into the substrate. I've never anywhere else seen this clear distinction between substrate and substrate consciousness. Usually they just say foundation consciousness. But this makes it very, very clear. I find it very helpful and illuminating. So this experience of vacuity and luminosity, the vacuity is the substrate, the luminosity is the substrate consciousness, and of course your experience of them is coextensive. They're not luminosity over here and the vacuity over there. They're coextensive. The vacuity is permeated by the light of substrate consciousness, and the substrate consciousness is homogeneously aware of the substrate in addition to itself. So now it's stillness meets stillness. Stillness of the substrate consciousness meets the stillness of the substrate. This is the substrate consciousness. But now, some teachers say that the substrate to which you descend is freedom from conceptual elaboration. This is a very highly advanced state of realization in Mahamudra. In other words, they wildly inflated this. This is not Mahamudra. You haven't even entered the path yet. But not knowing any better, some people get this and they say, oh, now I'm a Vidyadhara, now I'm in a highly accomplished Mahamudra practice. This isn't Tibet, let alone all the counterfeit currency that's floating around nowadays. So it was common. Some say it's one taste. That's an even higher state of realization in Mahamudra. There are 4 yogas. The freedom from conceptual elaboration is the 2nd yoga. One taste is the 3rd yoga. You're way on your way to Buddhahood by then. And you're thinking way up there in Buddhahood, and you haven't even entered the path yet. It's just a substrate. You haven't even entered the path. But others say it is ethically neutral. And that is true. It is ethically neutral. Whatever they call it, in truth, you have come to the essential nature of the mind. By essential nature, he does not mean the inherently existent mind. Simply, mind distilled down to its core features. It's luminous and cognizant. The essential nature, the stem mind, the stem consciousness. This is the H2O of mind. That's essential nature. The H2O is ready to turn into soda pop or any other fluid you like that has a water base. But if you evaporate all the other stuff off, what you wind up with, if you just get the evaporated distilled steam, that's just H2O. This is the H2O of the mind. This is the essential nature of mind. Now you have understood the nature of consciousness. You don't have to think about it. You don't need to speculate about it. You don't need to study the brain even for a moment. Studying behavior will never get you even in the ballpark. But now you've actually fathomed the nature of consciousness. Not its ultimate nature, or transcendent nature, but in terms of the natural phenomenon of being aware, which we share in common with all sentient beings, all animals, you've now identified it. And so when we say so often in modern science, consciousness is a mystery, 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 it's a mystery because you're looking in the wrong place. You keep on looking at the brain, behavior. As John Searle, very, very well-known philosopher of mind with whom I debated publicly years ago, he gave the analogy, and I think it's quite common, probably some of you know it, of the drunk. the drunk who's coming out after a party and he's like doing what drunks do, and he's looking under a lamp. It's nighttime. He's looking under a lamp, and the fellow says, "Hey, what are you looking for?" And he said, "I'm looking for my keys." And the fellow said, "Oh, did you lose them here?" He said, "No, I didn't lose them here. I lost them over there. But this is where the light is." Even neuroscientists have good jokes, you know. And that's exactly what mind scientists are doing now. They're not practicing introspection. They're not practicing shamatha. They're not looking at consciousness and probing it right down to the ground. They're looking where the light is. And the light is what their technology can illuminate. Behavior, they're really good at that. Brain, they're fantastic. Buddhists suck at brain science. We haven't even started. Because they're not really interested. Buddhists have never been interested that much in the natural laws of science. Buddhist math is kind of basically elementary. You learn that in elementary school. So the weaknesses of the West are the strengths of Buddhism. The strengths of Buddhism are the weakness of the West. So there's a wonderful complementarity here. But where we end, and I'm going to end in 2 minutes, is that there's just nothing intrinsically mysterious about consciousness, and why on earth should there be? We're all conscious, and we're all conscious of being conscious. We're more aware of being conscious than we are of anything else. They're more indubitably aware of being aware than anything else. So why should we know less about consciousness than we know about the Big Bang, the early formation of galaxies, the origins of atoms, why should we know less about that which is most intimate and know more about things that happened, the formation of galaxies 400 million years after the Big Bang? You can observe those with the Hubble telescope. That's amazing, it's fantastic. But why should we know about what happens 400 million years after the Big Bang, know more about that than that which we all know immediately, but we're looking where the light is. And where the light is the objective, physical, and quantifiable. That's what science is good at. That's why consciousness remains unknown, because you can't get there by using the methods, by mathematics and so forth, technology. You don't even get close. So there's been actually no progress in the last 150 years. Since the science of mind began and since scientific materialism dominated science, it's still as much a mystery now as it ever was. And of course, you're looking in the wrong place. So it's widely assumed, and I'll end in 30 seconds or so, widely assumed, I'm watching this in the media and scientific journals, the question keeps on coming up, I'm repeating myself here, how is it, what a mystery, how is it that the brain generates consciousness? How is that possible? And they never even ask whether it's generating consciousness. Because all they're looking at is what they're good at looking at, and that's the physical, objective, and quantifiable brain and behavior. So this is like, I'll give my analogy and I'll stop. This is like being a computer scientist, but a very naive one, or a person who's just has founded a computer and you really want to know how it works. And you see the screen, and that's kind of like behavior. You can see what's appearing on the screen. Anybody can look, there it is. And then you see the keyboard. And then you see that what's appearing on the screen is directly related to the keyboard. And you see if you damage the keyboard, stuff doesn't appear on the screen, or it gets screwy and so forth. And then you see, boy, there's a direct correlation. I do this, and there's that, and this. And so, wow. If I can only understand the keyboard, I will understand computers. And not even knowing there's such a thing as a hard drive. No, the belief that a hard drive is something separate from keyboard, that's superstition. Actually, a keyboard, the hard drive is just a function of the keyboard. If you understand the keyboard, you'll know everything you need to know about the hard drive. Well, I like to give this analogy, because when I first started using computer, I remember Jeffrey Hopkins, one of my mentors, had a hard drive that was about as big as a truck. In the printer, remember these gargantuan printers? This is way back. And then you got your little screen. The screen is a screen. And then when I had my first, you have a hard drive. You had a big box for the hard drive. Remember, it's the heavy part. Imagine you fell asleep when people still had hard drive, that big box, and the keyboard, and the screen is the screen, keyboard's the keyboard. But imagine you fell asleep. You became Rumpelstiltskin or went into a coma. And you woke up 30 years later, where everybody's got flat screen desktop, flat screen, and so forth, flat screen desktop. And you say, wow. We used to believe in hard drives. But I see, you don't need a hard drive at all. All you need is a screen, because that's all that's here. Here, there's a flat screen. I've seen screen. That's a screen. This is the keyboard. It looks the same. Wow, you don't need... Actually, hard drives probably never even existed. I probably was dreaming. Because all you need to know is the screen and the keyboard, and you'll know everything you need to know about computers. The hard drive is the substrate consciousness. hypothesis, testable hypothesis, all your memories, all your mental faculties are not emerging from the brain any more than the hard drive, the memories, the programs, and so forth. They're emerging from the keyboard. They're stored on the hard drive. If you damage the hard drive, you've got a problem. But all your memories are stored on the hard drive. You know, I don't need to tell you this. And so you'll understand the hard drive only if you look at it, and you'll never figure it out if you focus entirely on what's right in front of you, the screen and the keyboard. So what I'm saying here is not Buddhism is better, science is better. I'm saying perfect complementarity. Because the sophistication of the study of behavior over the last 110 years or so, since John Watson, is fantastic. They've learned many, many things, like Paul Ekman, his study of facial expression is brilliant. So they've learned a lot Buddhists haven't learned. And brain science, there's no competition. The tortoise of Buddhism is still at the starting line. We haven't even started. And after the last 50 years, neuroscience has taken off. Brilliant research, brilliant advances. But made no progress at all in terms of developing introspection and really first person actually looking at the mind and looking at consciousness. And so Buddhists come along and say, hey, your strengths are our weaknesses. Our strengths are your weaknesses. Why don't we create a center? Best center is, why don't we make it symbolically in the land of Galileo, home of the scientific revolution, and why not have it right near Florence, Leonardo da Vinci? Why don't we create a center that brings together the strength of science, the strength of Buddhist contemplative practice, in the land of Leonardo da Vinci, the home of the Renaissance, and Galileo, the home of scientific revolution, and why don't we get it together and all work together in a common pursuit of finding out what is true. Where does the mind emerge from? What is its nature? How does it influence the body and influence by the body? And what happens at death? Let's take on the big problems here. Let's not make it competitive. Let's get together and crack this nut and find out what is the nature of consciousness. Are you in? Then watch a movie.